Xbox is now 20 years old, and a lot has happened in that time. Now, first up, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and share. It really helps the channel out. So Xbox is now a household name, but it hasn't always been that way. The reason we have Xbox today is because of Seamus Blackley, a team over at Microsoft, and all the gamers that believed in Microsoft being able to put out a gaming console in 2001. And well, we have to start off with the brilliant introduction of the console by The Rock himself and Bill Gates.
It's about the future of video games.
Bill Gates, you never cease to amaze The Rock. Never cease to amaze The Rock. You're right again. Today isn't about you, it's about the new Xbox. And quite frankly, I couldn't be more excited. The Xbox is everything The Rock is. Cutting edge, powerful, exhilarating, and like The Rock, it will be the most electrifying thing coming out this year. And what The Rock is to sports entertainment and to the WWF, the Xbox will be to the video game industry a breakthrough and certainly an original. I mean, The Rock doesn't impress easily, Bill, you know that, but I'm pretty damn impressed with what we're seeing here today. And considering that this Xbox at this moment is only running on 1/5 of the system's power, it's very impressive. Bill, do you have any idea what The Rock would be like if he were only running on 1/5 of his power?
Well, I would think that...
It doesn't matter what you think, Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. It's just a force of habit. Rock apologizes. No, The Rock, even at 1/5 of his power, would still blow everybody out of the water, just like the Xbox. It is truly the future of video games, and I'm very excited to simply be a part of it if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
So Xbox had a lot to prove in an industry filled with competition, but they would prove it. So their console was actually really powerful, and it was packed with the latest entertainment features for the time, such as being able to watch DVDs and burn music to the internal hard drive, which was new for a console. You could also put your game saves on the internal, which means you didn't need a memory card. Now, one of the things that was really defining about this console were its games. Launching with Halo Combat Evolved changed everything. It changed how people viewed first-person shooters on a console with a controller, and it also changed game releases. Every subsequent Halo release became its own event. It was genre-defining and defined the industry. Every medium would talk about it. Halo this, Halo that. Halo literally changed everything. It changed multiplayer on a console. Halo 2 changed multiplayer forever. It really did. People still talk about it to this day. It's iconic. But the games varied. You had platformers, fighting games, you had hardcore RPGs, you had things like Jade Empire and Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, a game that had writing as good as the Star Wars movies, and storylines that were as good and sometimes even better. It was so impressive for the time, and to this day, its story is amazing. The lineup of games on that console was so good. But many of those games that we had back then on the original Xbox would never be made today. They would be considered risky, which was one of the cool things that made that generation so interesting, because all the games really did feel so unique. Then, in 2005, the Xbox 360 was introduced. Now this was a huge evolution for consoles, because this wasn't just another console that was just more powerful and that was it. It offered things like gamer tags, these unique identity profiles to each player, these things called achievements where you'd earn points per game and it would just all add up. Now the user interface, the blades on the original Xbox is iconic, but over that generation it actually evolved over time, and the second UI when we got the avatars was actually my favourite. But that was a big generation for indie developers, especially because that's when we had the indie boom. Things like Super Meat Boy and Trials HD and Braid were absolutely massive. They were phenomenons. These little games made by small teams, front and center on the store, selling sometimes in the millions. And those games stood out. We even had this thing called Xbox Summer of Arcade, where games would get highlighted and people would talk about these releases. But this was a special generation, especially for me, because we got these IP that would last till this day. things like Assassin's Creed became a household name. Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, Revelations 3, 4. Honestly, as an Assassin's Creed fan, the 360 generation was amazing. It really was. But it was also a generation filled with games that were very hardcore at the time. So we had things like Dragon Age Origins. Now, this game had thousands of years of history and backstory for its universe already written for people to dive into. So the universe actually felt really lived in, and it was just really cool for at the time, because that generation, the Xbox 360 generation, we got RPGs unlike we ever seen before. Then we had Elder Scrolls, Oblivion, and then Skyrim. Skyrim, to this day, is legendary. We still get releases of it. It's just so good. And we got that on the Xbox 360 in 2011. The generation was truly filled with amazing games. Now, that would be the first generation where Xbox would get its first mainline Final Fantasy game, that being Final Fantasy 13, and it was a huge deal for the time. It really was. This game was absolutely massive, and the thing is, its announcement almost broke some websites. It really did. Now, other than the game being a colossal size itself, being on multiple discs, it was a generation filled with big games bigger than we'd ever seen before. Now, this generation, Microsoft had helped fund some Japanese exclusives, them being Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey. In a lot of people's cases, we consider Lost Odyssey to be the best Final Fantasy game. Lost Odyssey is a absolutely amazing JRPG, something of which I'll have to talk about in a video itself maybe at some point, but that was a weird generation for Xbox because they were investing in all kinds of games. You had games like Viva Pinata by Rare. You had things like Alan Wake by Remedy. You also had things like Lost Odyssey and Blue Dragon. It was all over the place, but the cool thing about that generation in general was the variety of games, unlike anything we've ever seen before. We had licensed titles that were fantastic back in the day. There were sports games in that generation that were genuinely good. Call of Duty took off massive that generation. But that was also the generation we got these other games like BioShock and Dead Space. These games that would last the entire generation. These franchises people love to this day, and these franchises that people still want more of in 2021. These games are legendary. They are so good. They really are. But it's also the generation where Fable really came into its own. Fable 2 is a lot of people's favourites, including mine. Like, I love this game. It's a very quirky RPG, but it just works. It really does. You know, this would be the generation where Mass Effect would release, and your saves would continue to two other games throughout the entire generation. Microsoft invested into the first Mass Effect, and we'd never seen a sci-fi game on this scale before. It took what people loved from KOTOR on the original Xbox and expanded on it and made it even better, and it was truly impressive. That would also be the generation where Halo 3 completely changed multiplayer again, and it was another event. We also had things like Call of Duty taking off, Battlefield coming to console, GTA being huge on Xbox, but this is when hardware changed. The Xbox 360S and the Kinect came out, and the Kinect was a motion control device, and these two pieces of hardware essentially made the generation last a few years longer. So on the run up to the launch of the Xbox One, messaging was kind of all over the place, but this would be the generation that sets Microsoft up to who they are today. You see, Xbox spent the entire generation learning a lot of valuable lessons, and it benefited them and the gamers in the long run. In fact, Xbox is a better brand because of it. You know, the console launched with an array of games, a lot of first-party games, and the thing is, the controller was changed. It was more comfortable, it was more ergonomic, it was good. The sleek hardware, at the time, people enjoyed it. It was big, but it kept the console cool, which is what people wanted. But over the entire generation, Microsoft would invest in a number of very different games. So Sunset Overdrive by Insomniac Games, a very quirky open world game, something we hadn't really seen on Xbox before, and it was really good. Then they invested in things like Quantum Break, a game by Remedy, this very interesting sci-fi game that we don't really see games like this at all ever anymore. So they invested in games like that, but one of the biggest things that Microsoft invested in was Halo the Master Chief Collection. Halo is a household name, and the truth is, they needed this to work, and it didn't. But over the entire generation, Microsoft spent their time getting it right, getting it done, and to this day, it's a fine product, and I recommend it to everyone. It's such a great game, it really is. So, on board of Microsoft improving on all their other titles and updating games, adding features, changing the UI multiple times throughout the generation. So over the entire generation, Microsoft supported indie developers, and every week we were seeing more and more interesting games come to the platform. So on the indie developer side, everyone loved Xbox. Their support was unlike anyone else. But the generation was evolving, and people wanted more features. And it was at E3 2015 when they made an announcement for the biggest feature to date.
Decided to tackle a feature that has been consistently at the top of your request list. And while we weren't sure it was possible, today I'm pleased to announce Xbox One backward compatibility.
So this feature gave Xbox 360 games a new breath of life. They had access to more features such as screenshots and video clips, being able to play multiplayer with people on the previous generation. But also, people were able to go back to their favourite games and discover games they missed. Certain games even charted high. So when Red Dead Redemption, Call of Duty Black Ops and GTA 4 all became backwards compatible, they shot up really high on the charts in the UK and other countries because they were selling so well, even though they were a generation old. But backwards compatibility would change once again with the development of a piece of hardware. So the Xbox One X released in 2017, and Microsoft did a lot with this console. They made the smallest Xbox to date, yet it was the most powerful. We were getting 4K games and also 60 frames in a lot of cases. This console could actually run Red Dead Redemption in 4K. To this day, it's an impressive piece of hardware. Now, Microsoft made it a point of contention to make sure that these updates for the One X would be free. And that also went towards backwards compatible games. So games from the Xbox 360 would get updated over time. A lot of Xbox 360 games now support 4K. And these games look amazing to this day on new hardware. They really do. Now, Microsoft over the generation would also bring original Xbox backwards compatibility into the program, and also those games had access to 4K resolutions as well. So this console was doing a lot. Developers loved the thing, it was easy to develop for, and just more raw horsepower in a generation where people were talking about resolution all the time. And with this console, that was no longer a factor. So Microsoft had excellent hardware, fantastic backwards compatibility. They also added this program called Game Pass, which surprised everyone because people didn't know how long it would be around for, if it would catch on, and well, nobody really expected it to take off how it has today. Because originally, it was a pretty small program, about 100 games, and it wasn't really catching everyone's attention. Well, all that would change. Now, Phil Spencer had already been in charge of Xbox for a while at this point, but in 2018, they pretty much showed they had the full backing from Microsoft, because they purchased Playground Games, Ninja Theory, Compulsion Games, Undead Labs, The Initiative, and then in time they also purchased In Exile, Obsidian, and Double Fine. So their Xbox Game Studios lineup of studios was a force to be reckoned with. It really was. So their game output was already going to look ridiculous. But it all changed once again when they announced the purchase of Bethesda. So that was just one step in a series of big moves. The first being at the Game Awards the year prior, they announced their next generation console, the Xbox Series X. Nobody expected a console to be revealed at a Game Awards show, yet there it was, and it surprised everyone. Everyone couldn't stop talking about it. This was laying the foundation for next gen. It looked sleek, it was powerful, the most powerful console, and people liked it. And here's the thing. This was a big change for Microsoft. This was unexpected because huge corporations are kinda easy to predict, but this was unpredictable. Microsoft have been making unpredictable moves since. They really have. Now, Microsoft were clearly proud in the Xbox Series X because they would talk about the specs all the time, and they even gave access months in advance to certain people to show off the hardware, software features and all that stuff. But there was a secret, arguably the worst kept secret in the gaming industry, and that being the Xbox Series S. Nobody knew what this console was aside from a few people, but this is the entry model into next generation. The Xbox Series S was announced as this very tiny £250 box or $299 entry point into the next generation. This box can do 4K, and sometimes it can do 120 frames, it can do ray tracing. It's a very capable machine, and it's tiny. It's an impressive piece of kit, and it was the entry point into next generation. So despite everything going on in 2020, Microsoft got out their next generation consoles, games look and perform great, and frankly, that goes towards all the console manufacturers. They got consoles out in 2020 when it wasn't the easiest year on anyone. That goes towards graphics cards manufacturers as well. However, Microsoft still had big news to deliver, and that would be, where will you actually play Bethesda games going forward? And they made that crystal clear.
Say every Bethesda game is exclusive, because we know that's not true. There's contractual obligations that we're going to see through, as we always do in every one of these instances. We have games that exist on other platforms, and we're going to go support those games on the platforms they're on. There's communities of players. We love those communities, and we'll continue to invest in them. And even in the future, there might be things that have either contractual things or legacy on different platforms that we'll go do. But if we're an Xbox customer, the thing I want you to know is this is about delivering great exclusive games for you that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists. And that's our goal. That's why we're doing this. That's the root of this partnership that we're building, and the creative capability we will be able to bring to market for our Xbox customers is going to be the best it's ever been for Xbox.
Software and teams have really came just a ridiculous amount of way in that time. Even their studios have came a long way in the past 3 years. And personally, as an Xbox fan at heart, like, I've played games on all the different console manufacturers. My preference is just Xbox. Like, I prefer playing games there. My achievements, my friends list, and just the games they make. So many RPGs in development look great. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see what the next 20 years hold. If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like, share and subscribe. Hit that bell for notifications, you'll be notified for my next video. I have another video coming out shortly. Pay attention to Tuesday's All Things Xbox podcast episode 5. Got some surprises planned. And yeah, I hope everyone has a good day. I'm out. Peace.